Hello and welcome. This is the Fit for Privacy Podcast, the podcast for professionals. I'm your host Punit Bhatia. In this podcast, we talk to influencers so that you get to listen and learn from their experiences and thoughts. Remember, this is not legal advice, and if you need one, please contact a professional with your situation. So let's get started. Hello and welcome. Today in the Fit for Privacy podcast, we have Debbie Reynolds. Debbie, you are welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you so much for being with us. And you are known as the Data Diva. So tell me something about that and as part of the introduction. So how did this Data Diva came along?
Sure. So my name is Debbie Reynolds. They do call me the Data Diva. I'm the CEO of Debbie Reynolds Consulting. So I help multinational corporations navigate data privacy issues related to technology. The Data Diva moniker or nickname came about because I had gone to a networking meeting in the U.S. And one of the women that I had met at this meeting, we were sort of introducing ourselves to one another. And I was explaining to her what I did. She happened to be a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. And as I told her what I did, she said, "Oh, so you're like the Data Diva." And we laughed about it. And then I said, well, she's smart. She's a journalist. You know, they know how to like put things in very succinct fashion. So I said, oh, that's really interesting nickname. She said, you should totally use it. So at first I was shy about using it because I thought people wouldn't take it seriously. But I thought, you know what, this is interesting. I want to like try it. And it's worked out really well. People really like it.
That's good to hear. So you are a privacy technologist, privacy expert, data expert, technology expert, all that combined.
That's correct. Exactly.
That's good to know. Do you see your video moving? Because I see it frozen.
You know what? Yeah, I see my video moving.
Okay.
No?
Never mind. I think then I hope when the recording comes along, it'll move as well.
Exactly. Excellent.
Okay, so let me start with a bit of a challenging question to break the ice. What keeps you up at night if there's one thing?
Let's see. If there's one thing that keeps me up at night, I guess it is that I feel as though some companies or even people, they're really not digging down to the root of the problem or their privacy issues. So, you know, there are people, they have privacy policies, they may have lawyers that are advising them on privacy, but companies, they really get fined and they have trouble about operations. So some of the biggest companies in the world who have tons of money to throw at the problem still get these huge fines for privacy violations, and they're almost always having to do with not what they say they do, but what they do in actuality. So being able to join what they say they do to what they actually do is a disconnect that I feel is a unique challenge that really needs someone who understands the technology to be able to explain or be able to connect the dots in those ways.
Okay, so you hate when people say something and do something, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean that's, you know, the especially in the U.S. or companies that have a multinational footprint, you know, there are some technologies, as you know, that are under fire right now because, you know, they're saying things like we encrypt our data end to end, or we do X, Y, and Z. And then when you look at it, they're not doing any of those things. And probably that may have been a big decision and you choosing the technology to begin with. So in addition to there being like a customer trust issue, there's also regulatory issues about, saying that you do one thing and then doing something totally different. So I feel like that disconnect still exists in a lot of places. And some companies are hoping that they won't get called out on it, but people are more savvy now. There are a lot of more technical and privacy professionals out there that are reading, these really long privacy policies, and they're kicking the tires on this technology, and they're saying, wait a minute, this is different than you say it is.
Sure. So that was what what keeps you up at night, and what do you then love about privacy? What excites you?
The thing I really love about privacy is that it's ever changing. So there's always a new law, new process, there's a new technology, and how they try to implement privacy or something. Yeah, a lot of developers, when they're developing projects,
Mm-hmm.
they're not the last thing in the world they're thinking about privacy. So understanding what these technologies do, how it interacts with people's rights to privacy, and how they can work together in a more harmonious fashion.
Interesting. And where do you then see privacy in about 10 years, or the future of privacy, if I may call it like that?
So privacy, I think there's going to be a dichotomy between um, developing a level of transparency, because to me, privacy is about making people understand how you're using their data and how you're
Mm.
doing it, in the best way possible. So, all the privacy laws, in my judgment, are asking for a level of transparency in terms of how you use user data. So, and then there's also a challenge between companies having things that they can't, so a company can't necessarily disseminate your information to someone else because they're breaking your privacy law, but they also have to be able to be upfront and forthright about how they intend to handle this data. So a lot of the laws are um, trying to get corporations to be more transparent and more ethical in how they handle user data. So I feel like that's the biggest challenge. And that transparency is difficult from a technology perspective because a lot of the applications, as you know, aren't built to be transparent or aren't built to report back about how data is being used, especially as it relates to privacy regulations.
Yeah, I think with technology being so interwoven, it's sometimes challenging when data moves from your control to the other's control, and how you get to integrate with different platforms that you don't even know. So that's indeed quite challenging. And as we move along, it'll become more and more challenging.
Right. I agree.
And then we are also seeing a lot of US privacy laws coming up in different states. How do you see that privacy landscape or the privacy law landscape in the states evolving?
That's a good question. So, how do I see the privacy landscape in the states, U.S., progressing?
Yeah.
You know what? The laws in the U.S. have always been a patchwork of laws about every state doing its own thing. I think even more so now because of the COVID-19 pandemic, people are seeing on a worldwide basis that the U.S. is very different from state to state, and I feel like these states are really flexing their muscle about what
Yeah.
their rights are. So I don't know if we're going to be able to play nice enough in the sandbox to get a federal law about data privacy. But I do see, states have, in my opinion, have taken the reins on data privacy where they weren't waiting for a federal law. Like California with the
Yeah.
CCPA, Illinois with the BIPA, New York now with their Shield Act, which is a really interesting cybersecurity law that they have. I just feel
Right.
like every state is going to continue to do their own thing until the federal government, until or when the federal government comes together and tries to do something on a national basis. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. This is an election year in the U.S. So if you were to look at the talking points for the candidates, so now there's only two candidates right now.
Yeah.
Privacy is not on any of their agendas. It's not on anyone's
No.
list. That's like the last thing they're thinking about right now. but I think states will really continue to carry the torch for privacy in the U.S. And I think in some ways, I feel like it's a one-upsmanship. Like everyone wants to do something interesting that gets in the news. I think some states were a little jealous of California when they passed their privacy law and they were getting so much attention. So I think we're going to start to see other states try to do something a little bit different to try to, get some of that limelight, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's gonna be challenging, but it's true. In the short term, we will see laws which are state-based, and then eventually maybe federal law will come along, and then it'll be interesting to see which one do you prevail, because if the state law is stricter, what do you do with it?
Right, exactly, exactly. I agree. I mean, I guess in some ways we're, maybe in the future, like let's say the way the GDPR is now in Europe, where, so they have this privacy protection law that goes over all EU member states, but member states also have their own local laws. So maybe it'll be
True.
something like that, where it's like this is like kind of the base set of laws, and then then our own locality or our state has these other laws. The problem is, I feel like it's an opposite problem that I think the U.S. will have if and when the U.S. get a federal data privacy law. It'll probably be very thin, so it won't be. I don't think there'll be a ton that all states can agree on. So to actually
Yeah.
have a federal law, probably won't have a ton of stuff in it, as opposed to the GDPR has a lot of things in it, where everything else for these other localities is sort of an add-on or a tack-on to that, where I feel like the states still will have a lot. I don't think a federal law will cover enough of what the states are doing on a privacy level to really become like a blanket thing has more primacy, especially because I feel like it won't be a lot there.
Yeah, I think only time will tell, but uh, anyhow, whether it's state-wise or federal law, implementing any privacy law is challenging. And in your experience, when you are talking to people, what's the most challenging aspect when it comes to implementing privacy laws?
You mean implementing privacy laws at a state or federal level? You mean legislatively? Is that what you mean?
No, I mean at a organization or a company
Organization.
level.
Okay.
Yeah.
The biggest challenges I feel, with trying to implement a privacy culture
Mm-hmm.
within an organization, I feel as though a lot of people think, oh, this is something that I can just add on. It's like, oh, like I bake this cake and then I put icing on top. So then I'll throw, the privacy is like the icing on top of the cake of everything else. Where as opposed to privacy should be baked inside of the cake. So
Right.
making them understand that this is just not something that you just add on to your program, or just because you have a privacy policy, or even if you have a lawyer that helps you with privacy, understanding the laws, that doesn't mean that you get a pass from actually doing and changing the way that you operate. So you really have to look at the processes that you're doing and procedures. You look at the technology that you're implementing, how people are using the data that you have, to make sure that, for example, you may be collecting more data than you need. So having people say, okay, why do you have social security numbers of these people, but you don't need it because these people aren't processing, um, you know, uh, they don't need this information. So asking those fundamental questions will help people stop and think about what is most important, what makes the most sense for their business, and it really reduces their risk as well of things like cyber breaches. If they're, let's say for instance, let's say you take credit card payments, but the receptionist has access to the credit card payment system. The receptionist, because they aren't doing those credit card payments, they shouldn't really have access to those systems. So thinking through those processes, I think, are the most challenging for people, and also being able to keep up with that by building a framework and a process and
Mm-hmm.
procedures for how you move along so that you can still get work done. You don't want privacy to be a situation where it stops your ability to run your business. But as we know, some people have been put out of business because they couldn't really follow the privacy laws.
True. And then, if those are the challenges, normally what's the advice or one piece of advice would you give any company to use privacy to position themselves better in data privacy? Because privacy can also be a competitive differentiator.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's very important because customers are really looking for organizations that they can trust with their information. So, people are being more savvy in terms of the consumer part. A lot of consumers, if they feel as though you're not handling privacy correctly, they will definitely go to a competitor. We've seen that time and time again with people. But in terms of the thing that I feel that companies need to do, if they didn't do anything else, they had to find a starting point. My recommendation is always to get rid of things that you don't need. So in order to get rid of things you don't need, you need to ask yourself, why do I keep this data? What is its purpose? Who needs to see it? So if you're asking yourself those questions and you're getting rid of data that you don't need, you're already in a better position than the next company.
So we basically start looking at the data you have and get rid of what you don't need. And that's a good starting point.
Absolutely, because it's like you don't want to have to boil the ocean for everything. Maybe you do have a privacy problem, maybe you don't, but it's sort of like spring cleaning, I call it.
Yeah.
When I see corporations keeping a lot of data, I call it like hoarders, the corporate edition. It's like you can't really make a justification for having stuff. So if you get rid of things you don't need first, it'll make it easier as you go through this privacy process, because now it's like, okay, we only have what we need. Then now let's figure out what's the best way to protect the data that we have.
Yeah, I think that's a paradigm shift because traditionally companies were looking at accumulating data, collecting data, and then came big data, and then they were thinking that for their analytics they need a lot of data. While it's not about a lot of data, and that's what data management comes in. It's about having the right data so that your analytics are good and your results are even better. And that's what privacy also enforces by saying only have the data that's necessary and required.
Absolutely. I tell people, if you're trying to find a needle in a haystack, why build a bigger haystack? You want the haystack to be as small as possible, or you have your data collection to be as targeted as possible, so that you don't have to do a lot of churn. It takes a lot of time. It costs a lot of money to figure out what insights that you need from the data that you have.
Indeed, and I think more data you have, more the risks. Of course, the storage prices are going down and down, but still, more the data, more the risks, more the chances of a breach, and more the protection you have to put in. So
Exactly.
it's always better to have just the necessary data.
Exactly.
So another thing that sometimes people say that companies are not acting because there has not been any major enforcement action, especially in context of the GDPR. And with
Yeah.
almost 2 years gone, what is your view? Would that change, or how do you see the enforcement actions? Have there been enough, or do you see more?
So I don't know. So this is something I talk with people about this all the time. This is actually one of my favorite things to be asked. So thank you for asking this question. Um, so the EU, as you know, had a data protection law before the GDPR, uh, and they were, at the time that GDPR went into force, they were still processing cases under that previous law. So things that had happened before then were being processed under that law. And as you know, these cases take a long time to do. So the GDPR put together like this new framework with data privacy officers and things like that. But there were still things under that old law that were being adjudicated. So what we're seeing now are, which aren't getting a lot of press, are the cases that were under that old law. they're finally clearing the table with those cases. They're finally concluding, and now I feel like they're in a position to start on these newer cases. So there was kind of a backlog, and I don't know. I think especially from the U.S. company perspective, people thought, oh my God, the GDPR is coming into force on day one. They're going to start finding people, and my perspective from the EU side is, this is a law, okay? So there really isn't any rush for them to start finding people right away. And what they really want is to work with companies so that they can get into compliance. So they're not really trying, they don't want to have to find people. They really want them to be able to comply. So the
Yeah.
idea is um, to respect the fundamental human right of privacy in your organization, and they want to get companies on that path. And if they're not on that path, I feel as though there are going to be, you know, pretty significant fines that are going to come down. But again, I feel like a lot of those older cases were still in the pipeline. I can't remember. There was one, I want to say, maybe it was an airline case, whatever it was. They said that they had a data breach, and their data breach stopped. They were saying, oh, we had this data breach and it stopped on May 2018. So as you know, May 2018 is when GDPR came out. So they wanted to make sure for some reason that whatever they were doing, that it wouldn't be fined under GDPR. So we see a lot of those as well.
Yeah, I think that's a question that also gets asked when I speak at events. But the thing is, if it's new for companies, it's also new for regulators. And regulators also needed to get their staff, get their organization in place. And they've been using that time to set themselves up. And also, as you rightly say, the objective of the law was never to fine people. The objective of the law was to make sure the companies are complying with the law. And that's where the difference has been. There have been a few investigations, few fines, but the objective was to get people to comply, and that's what they want to see in coming years.
Right. Where in the U.S., I know a lot of people at the time. I know you had seen that a major corporation in the U.S. was fined
Yeah,
$5 billion, right? And people are like, well, why aren't they doing this under GDPR? The big difference is for this fine that happened in the U.S., that people were upset because there was not a lot of, beyond paying the fine, there was not a lot of an agreement about what the company needs to do to change, which is a problem. So if the company has enough money to pay a fine and they don't have to change the way that they operate, you're kind of back at square one, right? So I
yeah,
think that the GDPR is about changing the way that you operate as opposed to
right.
trying to throw these huge fines at you and you don't change.
Yeah. And I think that's where the interesting aspect comes in when we look around the times we are in. We are in the times of a pandemic. And the question then is everybody has, nobody knows, is how will the pandemic impact data privacy now and in future? Because not only the world will change, but also the definition or the way privacy is looked at will change. And of course, the GDPR or other privacy laws are sufficient in that regard. They never said data should not be processed. They never
Right,
said these things should not be done. It's a matter of doing them correctly, doing them respecting the rules.
right.
But what's your view around how pandemic will impact the data privacy landscape?
Well, you know what? I think uh, it's really interesting to see. So I think, I guess let me think back to before the pandemic. So before the pandemic, in my view, I felt as though a lot of consumers weren't as uh, I don't know, maybe interested. They weren't as
Yeah,
upset. They weren't as upset about privacy violations as they
right.
are now. Because I feel as though, like let's say they were downloading an app and it was some shiny new thing that they were happy, some game that they wanted to play. They didn't really care about it that much. But now they're saying, okay, well, we're going to have the government install an app that's going to track you all the time. And now people are really up in arms, around the world about this thing. So I feel as though the pandemic has has created more awareness for people
Right.
about their data and privacy, and people are getting really upset about it. So this is like the thing that we always wanted people to be, not necessarily upset, but we want them to be engaged in the conversation about their privacy. The other thing is, people are seeing, the power that private corporations have now over data. Who knew that application that you downloaded that was free, many years ago, like now can have almost any type of data you could possibly think of about you, including your health information. And, people are concerned about what is going to be done with that information. So obviously, governments are asking for technology help in this area, but people are concerned, and rightly so, like, what are these private corporations doing with this data? Am I going to be denied a job, or am I going to be denied insurance because of something that a private corporation can now share with some other person that I may not be aware of about, my financial state or my uh, physical being? All these things I feel as though are coming to the fore now as more people are seeing it for what it is, I feel,
Mhm.
right now. But then also, then you have people are very afraid. They're concerned. They want to be able to live their lives the best way possible. And some people are like, well, let me just throw my privacy away because, if I have this app, it's going to solve all my problems or whatever. And we know that that's not how the world works. So a lot of
Yeah.
it is about education, making sure people understand, be transparent with them about what, this is what's happening with your data. This is what we're going to do with it. This is how it's shared. Let them make a educated decision about how they move forward.
So from what I hear, I think it may be even better for privacy because people are getting more aware, and it will force the governments, force the private players to be more transparent around what's happening around data. So that's always a good thing.
Right. I agree. I agree.
Yeah. So moving on to more of the human side of privacy. So when we have the DPOs, the privacy professionals, the privacy advisors like you and me, we often see that a privacy expert or consultant needs to have the legal knowledge of the law, the technical knowledge of how systems work, the dimension of business, and also the ethics, and also technologies. So it's a big skill set to have. So how do you see this gap between different skills that a privacy consultant or expert needs to have? How is the landscape right now?
I think what has happened, especially since the GDPR came out, and the GDPR, as you know, is quite right now and probably will be for a while, considered like the gold standard in privacy laws because it's
Right.
very comprehensive, and a lot of privacy laws that have come after that have borrowed liberally from the GDPR in terms of their definitions and how they define different things. So privacy is complex. It's not something that, one person, you can't wear every hat. So not every
No.
person knows the legal part, not every person knows the technology part, not every person knows the ethics part. I
Yeah.
feel as though because it is a law, quote unquote, people are too heavily focused on the legal part and not on these
Right.
other parts. So these other parts, that's how people get fined. Okay, people get, when you look back at the fines that have happened or look back at the governments that have been investigating companies, um, they get fined for how they walk and not they talk how they talk. Okay, so you can say whatever you want, you can write whatever you want in a privacy policy, but if you're not doing it and if you don't know, I feel as though sometimes people don't know the right question to ask. Do you know how to really talk to a developer who's creating a application about how they develop their application? I mean, it's a lot more than saying, here's a privacy law and it says this is how I'm gonna do from a 0 and 1 bit and byte perspective. This is how I'm gonna perform or how I'm gonna develop the software. I mean, to me that's a huge gap that needs to be fixed, and I feel as though there needs to be some differentiation in that space. Where I know a lot of companies, they may be very gung ho on the legal part of data privacy, but not very uh, good on the operation side of it. So that's the challenge.
Yeah, and then what's the biggest challenge for DPOs? Because DPOs or data protection officers also have this challenge, of course, to understand legal, ethical, technical, and so on. But what is their biggest challenge apart from this?
I think our biggest challenge is finding the right person that knows what they know and knows what they don't know. So the worst thing you could ever have is a person who's a data privacy officer that thinks they know everything. So in my opinion, if you think you know everything, you don't know anything. That's just way too broad. So some people specialize in different things, and you need to know, when you need to reach out to get someone who maybe knows something that you don't know. Understanding where the gap is, and not overreaching. I've had conversations with people who don't really understand technology, and they'll say,
Right.
here's an example. So I think you get a chuckle out of this. So I was talking with someone who was a lawyer, and they were trying to advise a a a developer group about a database, and they were saying, the customer number in the database is personally identifiable information, so you have to anonymize the information. And I
Hmm.
was like, the customer number is the key in the database. Like, that is how all that stuff is tied together. So that can't be, you know, the personally identifiable information, because first of all, it's a number that's made up by the company, right, to identify the person, and it's the
Hmm.
key to everything in the database. So if you anonymize the customer number on the way people work, they won't be able to do their jobs. So that's not like good advice. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think what the person is saying is a customer number, which is really an internal key, not known to customer, not known to outside world. They were asking to anonymize it, even when it's being used by staff internally.
Right.
Ah, okay,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah, okay.
Now that doesn't work, right? You
Now,
can't do
if
you can't do business that way. That doesn't work that way.
yeah, it needs to be protected, but you can't change the number and give it something else to your staff to work with.
No, absolutely. Exactly. So thinking through those difficulties in terms of how people do their day-to-day jobs, I think is really important, because you want businesses to be able to grow and thrive, and you don't want to have them be handicapped by doing things that really don't make a lot of practical sense.
Yeah, and then in that function, so if the DPOs are challenged, law itself is challenging. How do small companies who have very limited resources manage this? And what was the biggest challenge, privacy challenge, that these small business owners are encountering? Because they are tight on budgets, they want to go to the market as soon as possible, they want to be innovative, and they want to be so called entrepreneurial or innovative and fast to market, fast, fast, fast. So, what's the biggest challenge they are facing from privacy perspective?
I think their biggest challenges for small companies to really be able to find a resource that is affordable for them. A lot of it is really understanding your own business and understanding your own risks. Not every company needs the same uh, privacy staffing as like Microsoft,
Right.
obviously. So you don't have to be Microsoft, or you don't have to try to be a mini Microsoft or anything like that. But you want to know, you need to at least have some idea of what your risks are. First of all, what customer data do you collect in the first place? Is this any sensitive information to begin with? Are there people in the marketplace that I can ask about this? LinkedIn is a great place to ask those types of questions, and and to be able to ask for recommendations for people who may be able to answer those questions. Maybe you don't need a full-time person. Maybe you need just someone that you can call maybe once a month or something
Right.
to ask them questions. So there are many different ways to be able to approach this, but you definitely want to be able to find someone that you can at least, ask a question. There's some people they're kind of on retainer for, maybe
Yeah.
a couple of hours a month for you to be able to touch base with them or have them do like a training. To me, is a little bit parallel to like cybersecurity in some ways, where you really want to be able to have someone that you could pick up the phone and call, whether you're a full-time person or a part-time person or someone that you just retain, for a couple of hours a month, just to get some idea of what your issues may be. Being able to have that person that you can call before a crisis happens is very important because they may help you. For example, they may be doing a triage thing with you where they say, okay, here's your high, medium, and low
True.
risk. Let's look at your high risk stuff first. And figure out what's the best way to mitigate those issues before we go to the medium and lower issues.
Indeed. And I think that's a big challenge for small and medium enterprises. Not only finding the right resource to help them on a part-time basis, because people like you and me help them with that part, but even if you have us as helping them out on a need basis, on a fixed fractional basis, as we may call them, you still need to understand when to call the other person, when to call us, or when a situation warrants. So you need to build in some sort of a understanding of contextual privacy. When is it applicable, when it's not applicable?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's a good point. So contextualization of it is very important. So some people, I think, especially small business owners, they're always concerned about being taken advantage of by people they may
Right.
reach out to that they want to give them all these, we have all these bells and whistles, and they're like, well, I just only need this. I need, what are the things that are going to stop me from doing business? Maybe look at it that way. What are the critical things that I need
True.
to work on? What are the things that, maybe not critical right now, but may become an issue in the future? You want to have some type of view into your organization, even at a high level, to figure out,
Absolutely.
this is what I'm dealing with. Here are my issues and my challenges. This is how I move forward.
Exactly. And I think there's no one size fit alls, because sometimes I go to some clients and they say, okay, you tell us what's your package. I mean, it's not a package. We need to
No.
talk what you do, what data you have, where
Yeah.
you are. And then, okay, once we've fixed things, there may be a package, there may be a
Right.
arrangement around how I help you or you help them in on an ongoing basis. But it doesn't start like, okay, you'll need me 2 days a month and that's done. You don't need to do anything. I'll do everything for you. No, it's together that we will need to start, understand, analyze, and then take some actions, and also make you aware of when to connect. But
Right. Exactly.
that's a
Exactly.
common challenge, it seems like, for most
It
consultants.
it is a common challenge. I agree.
Yeah. And then if we look at it from the perspective of customers or the individuals whose data is being processed, I think there's also at this moment, how would I say, a limited awareness around what's happening with their data. Would you
Right.
have any ideas around how can that be fixed in the larger context? Of course, as a company, you want it's good they are not aware, because if they are aware, they will exercise their rights, they will make a lot of requests, and we will challenge privacy statements and so on. But
Hmm.
from a generalist perspective, as your scope is also to educate people, so what one advice should we give to individuals so that they can better take care of their data and be better aware about themselves as consumers?
So I want to make sure I understand your question. So are you asking from a consumer perspective or from a business perspective?
I'm asking from a consumer perspective, because from a business perspective, some people would be happy that okay, consumer doesn't know much because they are not asking, making that many rights requests. But from a
Right.
end of the day, the law is for the people. And
Right.
if the people are aware, better aware, rather than scared and having misinformation, that's
Hmm.
better for the society.
Hmm. So I agree. I think from a consumer perspective, the thing that I find very different in different countries, because I talk to people all over the world, and to me it's fascinating to see how they feel about their rights as a consumer, where people in Europe are very passionate about it, and they're very, in my opinion, very educated about their rights, more so than people in the U.S. In the US, it's like people think that they have more rights than they have. So when I see, it's funny because when I told someone recently about, this app that would be downloaded to people's phone to check their health status, like first thing they say is, "Oh, that's against my constitutional right." It's like, no, there is no right in the Constitution really
Yeah,
for this, so I feel as though a lot of the sort of laissez-faire attitude about privacy in the US is because they kind of thought, some people think that they had those rights. So now that they're seeing that a little bit more clearly, I think they're people are standing up for themselves more, or they're trying to read privacy policies and get more educated about it. I think it has to be a two-way street. This, to me, a consumer to company relationship is a trust relationship. So the consumer has to trust, the consumer wants the service, they want you to provide them with the service, and they want to trust that when they are doing this, that they know that you're securing their data the best way possible, that you're giving them the rights that they need, and then really need to be able to understand even how to ask the question. How are you protecting my data? Maybe that's for the consumer part of their own education to read
right.
the privacy policy, look on their the website. Most companies will have some information about how they can handle customer data, whether they send you in an email, where there's a link on their website, if there are particular products that you have, there may be things that they mail to you. So those things are all important for consumers to be able to look at and be able to ask questions.
Right. So, in essence of time, and also to kind of wind down on a kind of a positive note, what do you think has been the biggest achievement of GDPR from a regulatory perspective?
I think the biggest achievement of GDPR, this is funny that you asked this question. So when I talk to a lot of people in Europe, they are like, oh my God, GDPR is this and that. They may not be as happy about what has happened with the GDPR, or they feel like it's
True.
more of a paper pushing exercise where people outside of the EU that I know, they look at it as sort of a gold standard. About
Right.
how people handle privacy, so it really kicked off the conversation in a way that it had not done before, and I think it's because of the fines with the GDPR. So that is the thing that got C-suite attention. That is the reason why, people are calling us up right now, because they're concerned about not only the GDPR, but how other countries or other states and municipalities are looking at GDPR, and how they're taking parts of GDPR and implementing them into their own laws. So for
Absolutely.
me, it's been great because it gives somewhat of a structure to how places can look at privacy, and how they can try to find a way to articulate those things. As you know, when people talk about comparing privacy laws, it's almost impossible to do a comparison of privacy laws without actually mentioning GDPR. It's almost impossible, because that really is the only comprehensive framework that really touches on almost anything that you could possibly think of, even though there are other laws that may go deeper into some aspects of GDPR. It's just so comprehensive that it's like a very good roadmap for people.
Absolutely. So I would say thanks for being with us. But if you have can give one final message to the audiences around privacy, compliance, or all these things, what would that be?
So one special note I have, and this is for consumers and companies, find a way to educate yourself. Read articles about it, maybe put a alert together on these laws where you can get an email or something where they will tell you, because this is ever evolving. There are always new cases. There are things that come up that may benefit you in the future if you know more about it. So an educated business and an educated consumer is really important. And as these laws continue to evolve and change, being able to keep up with it, on an ongoing basis will be better than trying to do a deep dive, at once. So that would be my advice.
That's, I think, perfect. Educate yourself, keep up to date, and stay on top of what's happening in the field of privacy. So with that, thank you so much, Debbie, for being on the show and educating our listeners and also sharing your thoughts. So thank you so much. It was great having you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it, and I'm happy with you and your company and the things that you're doing. And I'm glad that you're sharing. We're reaching across the globe right now. I'm in Chicago, and where are you now? You're in.
I'm right now in Brussels.
In Brussels, that's what I thought. So to me, it's fascinating that we can do these conversations around the world and not have to travel or get on a plane.
We don't know when that will start, but I think it's fascinating how technology is assisting and how we can have conversations around privacy. So great having you. Thank you so much. And for everyone who's listening, this was Debbie Reynolds, the Data Diva. And till next time, stay blessed.
Thanks for tuning in. I hope you liked this effort. Please do click like, comment, and share. It is okay if you did not like it. Please still do make a comment and share with us what we can improve. If you have suggestions, ideas for guests, or you want to have your question answered, please email me. My email is info@punitbhatia.com. You can also share this with others, and if you do so while tagging me in, I will personally thank and acknowledge your contribution in coming episodes. Thanks once more, and look forward to seeing you back. Till then, stay safe, stay blessed, and stay happy.